Imagine hiring a stranger for one night, someone to stand by your side, smile for the cameras, and disappear when the evening is over. But what if that stranger turned out to be one of the richest men in America? And what if, in just 24 hours, he changed your life forever? Tonight, I'm going to tell you the unbelievable story of Emma Chen, a woman whose career hung by a thread on one glittering night in Manhattan, and the mysterious man who stepped into her life when she least expected it. A night that began with a lie and ended with a love neither of them could have imagined. So grab your seat, because once we step into that ballroom, nothing will ever be the same. Emma Chen stood before her full-length mirror in her Manhattan apartment, smoothing the emerald silk dress that hugged her figure. Tonight was no ordinary night. It was the annual Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala, a make-or-break event that could determine whether she would finally be promoted to partner at Pinnacle Advertising or remain trapped in middle management forever. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard Hampton, her boss. "Emma, tonight is crucial. Impress the Hartwell board. This contract could be worth millions." She already knew the unspoken part. Arrive with a charming date. It wasn't about romance, it was about optics. But her dating life had been a wasteland for months. After her last relationship had collapsed under the weight of her career, she hadn't had the time or energy to meet anyone. 3 days earlier, desperation had driven her to a decision she never imagined she'd make. She called Elite Companions, a discreet agency known for providing polished escorts for high-profile events. She requested someone educated, articulate, capable of discussing business and current events. The agency assured her they had the perfect candidate, Michael Torres. Now, at precisely 7:00 p.m., her doorbell chimed. Emma opened the door and froze. This was not Michael. Standing there was a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair, and piercing gray eyes. His black tuxedo fit like it had been sewn onto him, and his presence seemed to expand to fill the hallway. "You must be Emma," he said smoothly. "I'm afraid Michael had a family emergency. I'm David. I'll be your companion tonight." Emma's mind raced. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if he'd ruin everything. But the gala started in less than an hour, and walking in alone was not an option. Against her instincts, she stepped aside. "Come in. We need to get our story straight." David smiled faintly. 3 months together. We met in a Soho bookstore. I was buying philosophy. You were in the business section. His improvisation was so seamless, Emma found herself reluctantly impressed. She noticed the quiet confidence in his movements, the way he studied her like he was memorizing details. She didn't know it yet, but nothing about tonight would go according to plan. The elevator ride to the lobby was silent except for the hum of the cables. Emma kept stealing glances at David, trying to decipher him. He carried himself like a man used to being in control, too much so for someone who supposedly made his living as a hired companion. When they stepped into the waiting black sedan, David's hand brushed the small of her back. It was a gentlemanly gesture, but it sent a shiver up her spine. "Nervous?" he asked. "Always before big events," she admitted. "This gala could decide my career." "Then let's make sure they remember you," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering. The Mandarin Oriental's ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. New York's elite moved in small, watchful circles, their conversations blending into a low, expensive hum. Emma felt the familiar pressure settling on her shoulders, until she noticed something strange. Wherever they went, David seemed to subtly shift the energy around them. When Richard Hampton approached, his eyes swept over David with curiosity. "Emma, you look stunning. And this is—" "David," she replied, pulse quickening. Richard extended his hand and David took it with quiet authority. "Pleasure to meet you. I've heard about your work with the Hartwell Foundation. Environmental sustainability marketing fascinates me. The challenge of making conservation profitable requires innovative thinking." Emma nearly dropped her champagne glass. David spoke with the kind of insight and authority that came from years at the top of an industry, not from memorizing a cover story for one night. Richard seemed impressed, and in a matter of minutes, David had him deep in conversation about market trends. As the evening progressed, David became the perfect social partner, charming without being overbearing, attentive without being possessive. He remembered names, referenced details people had mentioned earlier, and asked questions that advanced Emma's professional conversations. It was as if he had stepped out of some secret playbook for social mastery. During dinner, the president of the Hartwell Foundation leaned toward Emma and whispered, "Your boyfriend is remarkable. You're very lucky." Emma smiled politely, but inside her confusion was growing. This man was not what he seemed. When the orchestra struck up a slow number, David extended his hand. "May I?" She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. On the dance floor, his touch was steady, guiding her with easy confidence. His cologne, something expensive and understated, wrapped around her like a spell. She caught herself looking into his gray eyes, feeling an unexpected warmth in his gaze. "This doesn't feel like a performance," she murmured. "Maybe it isn't," he replied, his voice low enough for only her to hear. The song ended, but they didn't step apart right away. Around them, the crowd blurred into soft motion. For a moment, Emma almost forgot why she had hired him at all. Then her assistant appeared, breathless. "Emma, you'll never believe this. James Alexander from Technova Industries is here. He never comes to these events." Emma felt David's posture stiffen beside her. When she glanced up at him, his expression was perfectly neutral, except for his jaw, which had tightened almost imperceptibly. "Who's James Alexander?" he asked. Her assistant grinned. "One of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the city. People call him the ghost of Silicon Valley." Emma noticed something flicker in David's eyes, something between recognition and calculation. And in that moment, she realized, whoever this man was, his secrets were far bigger than she'd imagined. The rest of the evening played out like a dream. Deals were hinted at, introductions made, and by the time Emma and David slipped out of the glittering ballroom, her career prospects had never looked brighter. In the car back to her apartment, Emma caught herself hoping the night wouldn't end just yet. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. David studied her for a moment, as if weighing something private, then nodded. "I'd like that." Hours passed in a blur. They talked about books, leadership, travel, about anything and everything, until the clock crept past 2. Despite the charged undercurrent between them, David never crossed a line. When he finally left, Emma felt both relieved and strangely disappointed. The next morning, sunlight spilled through her curtains. She caught the scent of coffee, strong, rich, exactly how she liked it. Padding into the kitchen in her silk robe, she found David there, shirt sleeves rolled up, preparing breakfast like he belonged. "Good morning," he said, handing her a cup. She blinked. "You made it perfectly, but I never told you how I take my coffee." He smiled faintly, not offering an explanation. Over croissants, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression sharpened instantly, relaxed charm replaced by crisp authority. "Excuse me." Through the glass balcony door, she watched him pace, his tone clipped, decisive. She caught fragments. Merger talks, board meeting, stock price. Consultants didn't talk like that. CEOs did. When he returned, his smile was back, but thinner. "I may have to cut our morning short," he said. Emma felt a flicker of frustration. "Of course, I know how consulting can be." He hesitated. "Emma, about my work." His phone rang again, cutting him off. This time he stepped into the hallway and she heard even less, but enough to know her instincts were right. After he left, she tried to focus on work, but her mind kept circling back to the same questions. Who exactly was David? Why had he really shown up at her door? By mid-afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She opened her laptop, digging into whatever traces she could find. The agency's website was vague. Searches for David in New York consulting turned up nothing. No LinkedIn, no old press photos. It was as if he didn't exist. Then a conversation from the gala replayed in her mind. Catherine Hartwell's voice, warm and curious. "My husband swears he's seen your young man somewhere before." On impulse, Emma called Catherine to thank her for the evening. Catherine chuckled. We finally remembered where we'd seen him. In Forbes, of all places. Looked just like a young tech mogul. "Oh, what was his name?" Emma's pulse spiked. James? Alexander? Yes, CEO of Technova Industries, but of course it couldn't be the same man. The phone almost slipped from Emma's hand. After she hung up, she typed the name into her browser. The first image made her stomach drop. The gray-eyed man staring back at her from a glossy profile wasn't David at all. It was James Alexander, worth over $3 billion, famous for avoiding the public eye, and absolutely, unmistakably the man who had pretended to be her escort. She sat frozen, the truth pounding in her ears. Why had one of the richest men in America walked into her life under a false name? Emma's mind spun through 1,000 possible explanations, none of them making sense. Was this some elaborate prank? A billionaire's boredom? Or something far more calculated? Her phone buzzed. A text. David, can we meet? I have something important to tell you. She stared at the message for a long moment, pulse hammering. Then she typed back. My apartment, 1 hour. By the time he arrived, Emma had gone from pacing in anger to sitting frozen in confusion, then back again. When the door opened, the man standing there wasn't tuxedo-perfect David, but casual, expensive James. Designer sweater, tailored jeans, confidence softened with a flicker of nervousness. Emma, we need to talk. Yes, we do, James, she cut in. He froze, color draining from his face. You know, I know you're James Alexander, CEO of Technova Industries. What I don't know, she said, crossing her arms, is why one of the richest men in America pretended to be my escort. He exhaled slowly, raking a hand through his hair. It's complicated. Try me. James moved past her and sat heavily on the sofa, leaning forward on his elbows. I wasn't supposed to be at your apartment at all. I had a dinner meeting at the Mandarin Oriental. When it ended early, I decided to avoid the photographers out front by taking a different route through the hotel. Then you mistook me for your date. And you just went along with it? I should have corrected you, but... He hesitated, looking her in the eyes. Do you know what it's like to have every interaction colored by your bank account? To never know if someone likes you or the lifestyle that comes with you? For one night, I wanted to be judged by my words, not my net worth. Emma's anger wavered, just slightly, but she held her ground. So you lied. I decided to see what it was like to be ordinary, he said quietly. And then I found myself enjoying your company more than I expected. It was the most genuine night I've had in years. You could have told me afterward, she countered, though her voice softened. I wanted to. I almost did. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd start seeing dollar signs instead of just me. Emma looked away, swallowing the knot in her throat. You think I'm that shallow? No, he said quickly. But it's happened before. More times than I care to remember. For a moment they sat in silence. His admission was disarming, unexpected from a man whose life most people would envy. She could see the weight in his eyes, the exhaustion of living behind a public mask. So, what happens now? She asked finally. James stood, moving closer. Now, I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that what we felt that night had nothing to do with money or status, that it was real. She studied him, torn between caution and the pull she'd felt since the moment he'd walked through her door. You lied to me, James. How am I supposed to trust you now? Because I'm telling you the truth now, he said, his voice low, when I have everything to lose by doing so. He took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Emma, I'm falling in love with you. Not with what you can do for me, but with who you are, your intelligence, your ambition, your kindness. Her heart stuttered, but her head was still spinning. This is all happening too fast. 24 hours ago, I didn't even know your real name. I know. He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. But I'm asking anyway. Have dinner with me tomorrow night. No lies, just us. She hesitated, logic screaming to send him away, her heart leaning toward him anyway. One dinner, she said at last, but from now on, no more lies. James's smile was equal parts relief and hope. No more lies, he promised. The next evening, Emma stood in front of her closet for the third time in an hour. Every dress felt like a statement, too formal, and it would seem like a business meeting, too casual, and it would look like she didn't care. After much second-guessing, she settled on a simple black dress that made her feel confident without being overdone. When she stepped out of her apartment building at exactly 7, James was waiting beside a sleek black car. Not the flashy sports car or limousine she might have expected, but something understated, luxurious, without announcing itself. "You look beautiful," he said, opening the door for her with a subtle, old-world grace. She slid into the leather seat, noticing its comfort and quiet elegance. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk," he replied, without interruptions or curious eyes. 20 minutes later, they pulled up in front of a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, its wooden doors and warm lighting a far cry from Manhattan's polished dining scene. "This doesn't look like a billionaire's usual haunt," Emma said, half teasing. "That's the point," James answered with a grin. "Yeppe and Maria have run this place for 30 years. Here, I'm not James Alexander, CEO. I'm just a regular customer." Inside, the scent of garlic and fresh herbs wrapped around them like a welcome. Yeppe himself emerged from behind the counter, breaking into a smile when he saw James. "Ah, you bring us another beautiful guest," he said, clasping James's shoulder warmly before turning to Emma. "Welcome, welcome." Emma watched as James greeted the couple with genuine affection, no hint of the guarded polish she'd seen at the gala. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, softer, unguarded, human. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, James began to talk, not in bullet points like a CEO giving a speech, but in stories. He told her about inheriting the company at 25, about the fear that came with suddenly being responsible for thousands of employees, about the mistakes that almost cost him everything. Emma listened, captivated. "What kept you going?" she asked. "Stubbornness," he said with a half smile, "and knowing people depended on me." "You've built an empire," she said. He shrugged. "An empire's not much if you can't share your life with someone who sees past it." She looked down at her wineglass, feeling the weight of his words, and the pull in her chest she didn't want to name. Dessert arrived, tiramisu so light it practically melted on the spoon. They lingered over it, the conversation shifting to lighter things, favorite books, dream travel destinations, the best coffee in New York. Then, as they stepped out into the cool night air, the flash of a camera exploded across the street. "James Alexander, is this your mystery girlfriend?" a voice shouted. Another flash, and another. Emma froze. "Get in the car," James said, low and firm, steering her toward the curb. The photographer followed, firing questions like bullets. "What's her name? How long have you been dating? Are you moving in together?" By the time they pulled away, Emma's pulse was still pounding. The night's warmth had been shattered, replaced by the cold truth of James's world, a world where privacy was a luxury and strangers felt entitled to her life. James gripped the wheel, jaw tight. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have known this might happen." Emma stared out the window, her reflection blurred by the city lights. She had wanted the truth. Well, this was part of it, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for all of it. The ride back to Emma's apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the engine. James kept glancing at her, as if searching for some sign she hadn't completely retreated into herself. When they reached her building, he walked her to the entrance but didn't try to come inside. Instead, he stood under the soft glow of the lobby lights, his expression grave. "Emma," he said, "I need you to understand something. If you choose to keep seeing me, this—" he gestured toward the street where a lone photographer still lingered in the shadows, "will happen again. I can try to protect your privacy, but I can't make it disappear." She nodded slowly. "And if I decide it's too much?" Pain flickered in his eyes. "Then I'll respect that and walk away. You won't hear from me again." Emma studied him for a long moment. Even after tonight's chaos, she couldn't deny how alive she felt with him, how he challenged her, saw her, listened to her in a way no one else had. But being with James meant stepping into a spotlight she'd never asked for, with all the scrutiny and intrusion that came with it. "I need time to think," she said at last. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture so tender it caught her off guard. "Whatever you decide, meeting you has changed me, Emma. You've reminded me there's more to life than board meetings and profit margins." That night, she sat by her window, the city spread out below like a glittering web, replaying every moment of their time together. The connection was undeniable, but so were the complications. Dating a billionaire meant constant public attention, the risk of being defined by his name instead of her own. Her phone buzzed, a text from her assistant. "Emma, there are already photos online of you with some guy. Call me." So it had begun. Emma opened her laptop. Several gossip sites had plastered her photo alongside James's, each with its own wild headline: "Billionaire's Secret Romance, Tech Mogul's Mystery Woman." Her stomach tightened, but beneath the anxiety was something else: determination. If she was going to do this, she couldn't hide from it. She would have to stand her ground, keep her own identity, and make it clear she wasn't just an accessory to his life. Her phone rang. James. "I saw the articles," he said without preamble. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I can have my legal team get them taken down." "Don't," she interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "If we're going to do this, we face it head on. No hiding." There was a pause on the line, then his voice, softer now. "You're remarkable. You know that?" Emma smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "I'm terrified, but I'm also tired of letting fear decide my life. So yes, I'd like to see you again. On equal terms, James. I won't be your kept woman or your arm candy. I have my own career, my own ambitions." "I wouldn't want you any other way," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. 3 months later, Emma was backstage at a major conference, preparing to unveil the Hartwell Foundation's biggest environmental campaign yet. The past months had been a whirlwind: paparazzi outside her building, gossip columns speculating about engagements, but also new clients, powerful allies, and a growing confidence in her own voice. When she stepped on stage, James was in the third row, pride shiny. The presentation was a triumph. Applause thundered through the conference hall, and Catherine Hartwell herself took the stage to praise Emma's vision and leadership. By evening, Emma found herself at a small celebration dinner James had arranged. Friends, colleagues, and a few people who had quietly become her second family over the past months. Midway through the meal, James rose, tapping his glass for attention. His voice, usually so steady, carried a faint tremor. "6 months ago," he began, "I met a woman who challenged every assumption I had about life and love. Someone who didn't care about my name, my company, or my net worth, only the person I was when I sat across from her." Emma felt her cheeks flush as the table grew quiet. "You showed me," James continued, "that love isn't about finding someone to fit into your life. It's about building a new life together, one neither of you could have imagined alone." Then he reached into his jacket, and Emma's breath caught. "I know it's only been 6 months," he said, lowering himself to one knee beside her chair. "But in that time, I've learned more about happiness than I did in the 6 years before. Emma Chen, will you marry me?" Her mind spun with all the reasons to hesitate: the short time they'd known each other, the differences in their worlds, the scrutiny that would only intensify. But then she thought of the man who had stood by her career without overshadowing it, who had learned to appreciate coffee shops over corner offices, who looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. "Yes," she said, first as a whisper, then again, louder, with conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you." The room erupted in cheers. James slipped a simple, elegant ring onto her finger, his hands trembling just slightly. 6 months later, the Tuscan sun warmed the garden of a small hillside chapel. Emma stood in a modest bridal suite, adjusting the veil in her hair. The wedding was exactly what she'd wanted. No paparazzi, no headlines, just the people who mattered most. Maria fussed over the flowers while Rachel smoothed the last fold of her dress. "Nervous?" Rachel asked. Emma smiled, not nervous, excited. Through the window, she saw James waiting at the altar in a simple gray suit, looking at the garden like it was already perfect, though she knew his eyes were searching for her. The music began. She stepped into the sunlight, each step bringing her closer to the man who had entered her life by accident and stayed by choice. James's face lit up the moment he saw her. As they stood together, exchanging vows in the golden Tuscan light, Emma thought about the strange winding path that had brought them here. What began as a deception had grown into something real, built on truth, courage, and the kind of love that transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. When James slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, she knew the risks had been worth it. Because sometimes, the best things in life arrive when you least expect them, from the most unlikely people, in the most surprising ways. And for Emma and James, this wasn't the end. It was the real beginning.